Welcome to this presentation. I hope you have a good day.
So my daughter's home today. That was Evelyn, my 7-year-old. Um, I don't think you can hear it. I'm gonna re-listen to this after to see if you can hear it all. But she's upstairs. She likes to have her. It's just me and her here now. 'Cause my wife's at work and my daughter's at my mom's. My 2-year-old. So Evie, I can hear she's right above me. She's playing, teaching her dolls, and so I snuck down to record a few slides. All right. Ethology. If you could have this idea of this is basically just learning from or exploring what aspects of I say they're like human behavior and social organization. So like how we behave the way we do and how we socially organize, right? Like I just said the same word, just more exaggerated, but that's actually interesting. Like that comes to everything from like pair bonding to like so like how people date and stuff like that and pair up, and then how that also refers to like things like parenting. It also refers to things like peer pressure. When we get a little bit older, especially I'll talk about that, especially in relation to like late childhood, teen years. But this idea of how much of it is actually a reflection of our underlying biology. So this is more on the nature side of the nature nurture, this ethological or ethological or whatever perspective that's really looking at how some of these tendencies that we have both socially and behaviorally have links that are very physical, very biological, very genetic. And so John Bowlby, who's a famous psychologist and biologist too, and his student Mary Ainsworth, who was from the University of Toronto, which is kind of interesting, developed this concept of attachment theory and this concept of this intense relationship that establishes between mom and baby, and that it's a relationship that has genetic characteristics. So just think about this view that the ability and the need to form an attachment relationship early in life is a genetic characteristic of all human beings, that babies are born with a genetic one of their genetic characteristics is this need to form a bond relationship. It's a genetic characteristic, right? So that's like big time way of saying it's like big time on the nature side. It's internal. Now, there's two words to talk about this relationship, and we talk about it as the parent or mom forming an affectional bond towards the baby. So this emotional relationship with the baby, and a lot of this emotional relationship is biochemical. It's very physical. The emotional tie to an infant that's experienced by the by the parent, sorry, is what we call an affectionate or an emotional bond. And then we use the word attachment. We're talking about so it's just the direction that we're looking at. Affectionate bond is when the parent's looking at the baby. Attachment's when the baby's looking back at mom, and the baby's attached to mom. It's an emotional tie to a parent, and it's not only that emotional tie, it's also an emotional tie that provides a sense of security. That the emotional connection and a sense of security or a sense of being able to trust the world, that those are all combined. And so, okay, so what I basically want you to say is that, or know, is that attachment theory is sort of the overall theory that says that babies are actually born with this genetic predisposition towards needing attachment relationships. Okay, but then that gets facilitated by the fact that mom has this biochemistry happening within her that creates an affectionate bond towards the baby, and baby has that same kind of affectionate bond, plus its whole sense of security. This is where we're going to say the word secure attachment, that the words secure and security are roots of the same word. You feel secure when you have security. And then sometimes when kids aren't able to establish these attachments early, and when I say that there can be this thing called the reactive attachment disorder, which is a disorder or a problem. Remember, disorder always just means like, well, things could be in order or they could be out of order, and sometimes things can be out of order for whatever reason, and sometimes it's because of early attachment relationships, and sometimes people can have what's referred to as a reactive attachment disorder, a disorder that appears to interfere with kids like forming other social relationships. It's almost like they had trouble forming that first one, and they learned in that first one for whatever reason, maybe there was trauma, maybe there was unresponsiveness, that they learned that they can't trust, and then that gets played out in other places. This is basically like what Erickson said, but he just didn't call it. He said it called it a trust issue, but that this initial mapping of what relationship is plays out later, and it can play out later in a way that interferes with building successful relationships. One good thing to focus on is this idea that the majority of parents are successful in establishing an attachment, a solid or a secure attachment with their kid. So I say that the majority of parents manage to respond to their infants in ways that foster the development of a close relationship. But to kind of break down why it works sometimes and why it doesn't, we need to look at both sides of the equation. We need to look at how baby interacts with mom and how mom interacts with baby, or how baby interacts with parent, how parent interacts with baby. And that's what I mean about both sides of the equation. At the development of the parent's bond to the kid, and about the child's attachment to the parent. So that's what we're going to look at over the next few slides. Okay, if I was to run into one of you at the mall, okay, say for whatever reason, you make up an example, say both of us, say you went to like Toronto to go Christmas shopping, and for whatever reason I was there with my family too, Christmas shopping, and we ran into each other, and you're like, oh, there's my teacher, and I'm standing there with Charlotte, right, my 2-year-old, and like I introduce you to her. Are you going to be like, oh, hey Charlotte, what do you think about Donald Trump, or ask some like real adult question? It's like, no, of course not. You're probably going to be like, oh, hi Charlotte. Again, my voice actually there went higher, extended out. I'm doing all the vocal styles that are stereotypical of communicating with an infant. Hi, how are you? I'm like extending out my vowels. I'm actually like helping her learn how to talk. We don't necessarily know that we mean that. You're probably getting lower too. So like I mixed up because I said me, but say it's you interacting with my kids, you're probably like bending down a little bit. You're probably opening up your arms, sort of chest. You're making yourself more presentable. You're probably lowering and softening your voice. And the interesting thing is, I didn't obviously tell you to do any of that. It's like adults tend to do that. There tends to be this, I say that most adults automatically display a distinctive pattern of interactive behaviors and vocal styles towards an infant. That's like a way smoother way of saying what I was just stumbling to say. But that's the example, right? The example is like, hi, how are you? Is how you would talk to a baby. You wouldn't be like, hey, what's your perspective on blah, blah, blah. It's like you would know that they wouldn't understand those words. You wouldn't talk like that. It's like, and if you do talk like that, the baby's probably going to not respond, right? That there's this synchronicity or this mutual interlocking pattern of attachment behaviors shared by parents and child. And you can make an argument that that's one of the reasons the baby's smiling. It's like a smiling baby will attract warmer responses from the world in general. And how much sync there is, that degree of synchronicity between parent and child, seems to be heavily linked to cognitive development. So it seems really important in those early years that parent and child are like synced, like on the same page as much as possible. And the more so that is the case, we see that associated with positive results in terms of cognitive development, basically. Like Cognitive development is this like catch-all for brain development, cognitive processing, higher end thinking, memory, problem solving, attention, concentration, focus. In terms of the parent's bond to the kid, it happens in different ways, and the babies benefit from both types. Mom's emotional attachment to the baby is a little bit easier to understand. Obviously, they share so much physicality, right? The placenta was acting as this in-between space, making them two bodies, but they were two within one. They were as connected as almost as you could even ever conceive. And one, so anyway, so it's like, my point is that mom's biochemical relationship to baby is easy to explain, but it's interesting to note that dad also later in the pregnancy cycle, and if he's around a lot, will start to emotionally prepare for the baby, like in terms of chemicals like oxytocin, right, which is like a bonding hormone. And dads and moms tend to play differently with kids, and whether we're talking about like kids that don't have as much rough and tumble play and how that's linked to things like social anxiety later, I'll talk about a little bit later in the course, but at the risk of sounding old-fashioned, kids benefit from both types of interaction. Now, if there's scenarios where there's not like a mom and a dad, extended family members, I meant to say, and things like coaches and things like, especially extended family, like people need both male and female role models. As the child's growing, the infant's attachment to parents. Okay, so now think about this for a sec. When I say the child's attachment to the parent, what I'm really saying is the child confident that mom's around? That mom's actually going to come when they cry? And are they able to use them as mom as a source? Just so I don't have to say parents every time and make it all vague. I understand that like maybe an adoptive mom or a grandmother or a dad could be raising a kid, but just so I don't have to say that disclaimer every time I make the point, that talking about the baby's attachment in the baby's mind, it's like, can I trust that mom's there, right? So confidence in the availability of the attachment figure. And then the second part, it's not just is she there, it's will she be there in a way that meets my needs? Remember, this is a baby, and the baby's not having this as an articulated thought. The baby's having this as like an under the water. Again, it's so difficult to talk about what developing trust means in almost a precognitive way. And that actually trust is so foundational because it's one of the first things that's developing, and it's actually shaping the development of things that come after it. And so this is obviously like what trust issues are, is that issues associated from not establishing it early on, that lack of that mistrust, then becomes an interpretive lens for viewing future relationships. Right, that I say there that this interpretive lens, or this internal model of what relationship in the world is, that's learned by the child through their interaction with their parents. By the time they're about, what I say, they're 4 or 5, that model is like largely solidified, and then as the child goes out to school, they sort of play out what they think relationships and who they are is. Internal models become elaborated from the time the child's 1 until about 4 or 5, depending on the kid. Do I have a safe home base? Do I have a safe reliable attachment? Do I have a secure attachment? Right? Something that's safe and reliable is something that's secure. So I have a video I'm going to show that kind of shows, so there's different types. So there's basically kids can develop a secure attachment, or they can develop not a secure attachment, an insecure attachment. There's a couple different types, a couple different ways that happens. And I think this video does a good job at kind of just giving you a depiction of that.
We'll have you do a brief interaction with some play. Then, in just a few minutes, we'll send you back in. You step in the door.
Everett Waters is studying how far our childhood experiences influence our behavior as adults.
We'll come down to the lab.
Okay.
We'll do this now.
This experiment, which I watched through a two-way mirror, is designed to gauge how secure is the crucial relationship between mother and child.
Okay, this bunny is going to go here, and that bunny will be on top.
The value of the test has been established in studies that would watch a child, 1-year-old, and then follow it up and interview them about the relationships to their parents when they were 21 years old. So we're quite confident in the long-term significance of this relationship.
Peter, that's Peter.
After several minutes' play, the mother is signaled to leave the room.
Sweetie, I'll be back in 1 minute, okay? I'll get you back in 1 minute.
I'm sitting for you. Shame, I feel. But she'll survive. The key moment in the experiment is the child's reaction to her mother's return.
Hi. Hi. It's okay.
The important clue is whether the baby's able to become calmed down by the contact with the mother, get back to play. Sometimes it takes a couple of minutes. But you see, when the mother was out, she was only interested in the mother, no interest in the toys. Now she has a contact with the mother. She's beginning to show a little interest in the environment, and shortly she'll be right back with the toys where we started.
So you would call this a secure one?
Yes, yes.
She's certainly much happier.
Now, this is an insecure baby. We get the measure of the baby's play before the separation. When the mother leaves, the baby cries, goes to the door following her. Now, we sent the mother right back in, but the point here is not to distress the baby. We're just trying to challenge it. The baby puts her hands to her face in a sad expression, puts her face down. When she picks her up, she keeps her head down, her arms out, and then she sits in the chair holding the baby. The baby's still sullen. He's low-keyed.
So you would call this insecure
Yes,
attachment?
insecure. He's avoidant. He's not engaging her, and the reunion's not effective. And it's important to remember here that the thing that upset him was her absence. Her return should be the solution to his problem. Now this is another pattern that we see in babies who are not good at using their mother as a secure base at home. This baby is also insecure. But you'll see, we got a look at his play before the separation. The mother's left, and when she returns, she picks him up. He can't calm down. He's still upset. She offers a toy to amuse him or to comfort him or to distract him, and he slaps it away. She offers another. He slaps it away. He's angry. We call these babies resistant or ambivalent because they both want her back and yet can't use the contact. We think that the difficulty is that in the past, when he sought comfort, she's been inconsistent as to whether she's available and responsive or not.
Do you think these really are indications for vulnerability for depression later in life?
I don't think that insecure attachment in infancy is the cause of depression in adulthood. However, when a child learns that he can trust his mother to be available and responsive, he's beginning to learn that you can trust other people, that you can turn to them when you're in trouble. The baby is also taught by the mother, as he gets older, how to understand his emotions, how to construe events that happen to them. You know, every bump in the road is not a disaster. This is a powerful asset when you encounter difficulties in life.
So when you were watching the video, you saw, I'm just going to put these all up and then talk about them. You saw these type of parent-child relationships depicted. I want to kind of note that in those videos you would see the parent playing with the kid in the room, the researcher knocks on the door, the parent leaves the room. In almost all cases the kid's upset. What you're really looking for is when the parent comes back in the room, is the kid able to use the parent to calm down and then go back to play? Can they use the parent as a safe home base? Can they display a secure attachment? Yes, either. Can they use the caregiver as a secure base from which to explore their environment? And then you saw the three other depictions where, like, in the avoidant one, the kid was crying for the mom to come back, but then when the mom comes back, they're like, kind of like physically drawing away. Like they're almost leaning away. They're like avoidant. Or then the other one was the mom was like offering him toys and he's like resisting it. And he's almost like fighting off her soothing. Right? Because the soothing has probably been inconsistent. And it might not even be recognized by the child as soothing. And then, I don't think they really went into this one as much in the video, but I have to think of how to say this as gently. Like if there's a situation where a child's been abused and maybe hurt and loved by the same person, you could see how to an infant precognitive mind sort of, and by precognitive I just mean they're not thinking about their experience in the same way we are. That being hurt and loved by the same person would be completely confusing, completely disorganizing. it'd be hard to know up from down. Poor kids, right? That the world would appear dazed, confused, and fearful. Dang, dang, dang. That's always the worst. I just like explain this whole slide, and I'm like, how am I still at 25 minutes? Oh, didn't press record. Okay. That video demonstrated scenarios where mom and baby are playing in the room. Researcher knocks on the door, asks mom to leave. Mom leaves the room for a moment. Mom goes back in the room, and we observe how baby reconnects with mom. Is baby able to interact with mom and use mom as a home base, as a safety point from which to explore out the world? And on the last slide, I was making this point that like security and secure are the same word almost, right? So think of security attachment as meaning like the baby's able to not only calm down but feel safe in the presence of that person, which allows them to explore outward. That idea of using a caregiver as a secure base from which to explore the environment. Then you saw in those other situations examples of when that doesn't happen. So it's either like the baby can use mom as a safe home base or else it can't. And if it can't, it tends to exist in these three ways. Sometimes the baby's avoidant, which was that example you saw of the baby being held up and the baby like literally like physically pulling away and not looking towards mom. It's like this, even though what was upsetting the baby was mom's absence, when mom comes back, they're avoidant towards mom's care in a way that's not letting mom be a safe home base. Or like the other one where it was the mom's trying to give the baby toys and the baby's like knocking away the toys. The baby's like literally resisting her efforts at soothing, probably because soothing has been inconsistent and unpredictable. So I want to see you see all like there's 4 types on that page, but I want you to really see like 2, 3, and 4 is all just variations of when it doesn't go towards like when a secure home base is not established. That last one, insecure disorganization, and again, I'm going to try to say this as gently as I can. In situations of abuse, when a child in this kind of precognitive stage where just meaning that they're like not thinking through things through a filter the same way me and you are as adults, that if that child's being maybe abused and also sometimes cared for by the same person, you could see how that would be completely confusing and disorienting and shattering. The words were dazed, confused, and fearful. You know, these poor kids. You could see how that would become a chaos-based model to try to impose on future relationships. It's disorganized. It's not. It's a terrible thing to do to a kid because you're right from the beginning, you're setting them up to have an inconsistent trust. Sometimes the world is good and things work, and sometimes that same world hurts me, and it's, you know, to say it again, dazing, confusing, and fear creating. Okay, I want to show you a couple things. This is saying like, what are the origins of secure and insecure attachments? Like why are some attachments secure and some aren't? If you could have this, the first point, emotional availability from the primary caregiver is key, right? Now, I want to note that I don't just use the word availability, like it's not just physically being there. It's like the emotional part is a key word there, and that the emotional availability is contingent. Contingent means it makes sense. It's like if you're hungry and I bring you food, that makes sense. If you're hungry and I bring you stuff that you can, a sleeping bag, it's like, well, that's a different type of need. You might need to sleep later, but right now you need food. So food is contingent. So basically, that was a sloppy example. Basically what I mean is that when the baby cries because it needs to be changed, does it get changed? When it cries when it needs to be fed, does it get fed? When it cries when it needs to be soothed, does it get soothed? Right? Change me, feed me, love me. And those are the three things that babies need. And what's the sync like with mom? Like, is the baby hungry and mom's just trying to soothe it? How contingent is the responsiveness of mom? Okay, so just a few more points about where this comes from that you'd find it interesting to kind of do one of each. So in avoidant attachments, this is going to be more common when this is a tough one, right? This is like the Goldilocks principle again. It's like if parents are way too stimulating to the child, almost overbearing, or if they're not stimulating enough, it can be a risk of developing avoidant attachments. Resistant attachments are more common when the responsiveness of the parent is unreliable, inconsistent, can't be counted on. So when it's there, there's a resistance that it's even almost real. There's a resistance to feeling safe because there's a thought that you could be unsafe again. And then this last one that, this disorganized that I was kind of just talking about, that this tends to be more the case in situations where there's been some kind of abuse, or even maybe when the parent's been abused in the presence of the child, especially if it's from the other parent. And like, just think of how, again, when the baby's not putting it through a cognitive filter and they're just trying to make sense of it at this almost bio-emotional level, it presents the world as very disorganized. I don't know why I had that coffee sip on camera. Okay, let's get to the next slide here. So there's significant changes in relationship can change attachment patterns. So for example, things like a divorce, or things like, well, let's just be positive for a second. Maybe parents actually that are struggling get stronger on the things they're struggling with and establish more healthy patterns that would have a positive butterfly effect. Significant changes can affect attachment patterns. Bowlby suggests that and I had this on the other slide, that by 4 or 5 a child has this internalized attachment pattern. I didn't have this part, but I just had the 4 or 5 piece. What's so interesting is that this then becomes this interpretive lens that gets imposed, think of imposed, taken from here and put in there on other relationships, like with teachers, and like people that have insecure attachments with their parents tend to have trouble with other authority figures in general, right? And even at the peer level, because again, it's this idea that the earliest relationships set a model of what relationship is that then gets played out, and people can through work and through, like, people can get better, definitely people can improve that kind of stuff, but it's tough because then you start, everything plays off everything else, right? So if you're starting with a disadvantage when you go to school, and then you're not building good friendships, and then you're almost on the outside looking in right from the beginning. You're looking at research, and when you're looking at statistical effect, one thing that's interesting is when you're trying to do some study, right? You do a study and these people score like this, these people score like this, these people score like this. You say that these are different categories of styles of people or whatever. And then it's like, okay, well, does that actually predict anything about things that happen later? And the ability to predict is tied to this understanding of, are we actually measuring a significant difference between people, right? And that one of the interesting things is that attachment scores seem to have a huge effect on things down the road, right? So like children rated as successfully or securely attached to their mothers in infancy, then later on tend to be more sociable, more positive with their friends and siblings, tend to be less clingy and dependent on teachers, tend to be less aggressive, less disruptive in class, tend to be more empathetic and emotionally mature in their interactions in school and outside. So we see these impacts like from infancy to early school age. Okay, now I'm going to continue into adulthood. Right, then we see more likely to be socially skilled, more likely to be leaders as they get older, more likely to score as having at least normal, or I mean at least average or above average self-esteem, tend to score as increased sociability throughout early, middle, and even late adulthood, right? So attachment scores tend to be related to how socially engaged people are in late adulthood. It affects how parents parent themselves, right? The way you were parented affects how you parent. Right? And all this demonstrates this idea that attachment relationships become a foundation for future relationships. I'll just leave that up for a sec for you to write, because I kind of flagged through that list. But again, the point I'm trying to make is the fact that we can see these early scores, attachment scores, tied to all these and again, individuals, there might be an individual that scores as insecure and that doesn't follow into this path. But again, remember, we're talking about large numbers of people. And you see that these early attachment scores are actually predictive of things. And in some of the most core ways, like how we parent our own kids, that this early established model of who we are and who we are socially and how valuable we are and how we should value others, that it's not a little thing, it's a big thing, because it gets set as an internal model. And I want to say again, what's a model? A model of an airplane is not an actual airplane. It's a small version like that you can actually have sat in front of you. It's like Piaget's idea is that the child is building a mental model of the world. And part of that is, how much is this a trustable place? We talk about how the baby forms an attachment. It's not as simple as like, I don't know, how like a baby duck primes to its mother and, or sorry, imprints into the mother, and how it's like a relatively straightforward, especially compared to this. Human attachment is said to emerge through 4 phases. Okay, so this first phase, going from birth to 2 months, during this time the infants are instinctively directing their attention towards human figures. Strangers, siblings, and parents, especially not mom, are equally likely to elicit smiling or crying. Right away, biological moms being responded to slightly differently, more intensely. Phase 2, from 2 to 7 months, attachment becomes focused more on one figure, usually mom, as the baby gradually learns to distinguish between what's familiar and what's not familiar. Again, I've said this a few times, but at this time also, the baby's eyesight's getting much better. Phase 3, from 7 to 24 months, there's kind of specific attachments develop, increased locomotion skills, allow babies to actively seek contact with the regular caregivers, such as their mom and their dad. It's like if I'm doing anything in the kitchen, I have Charlotte like hanging on my leg. So now it's not only like me going to play with her, she's like actively coming to me, right? By phase 4, 24 months or 2 years and plus, children are becoming aware of other people's feelings, goals, and plans, begin to take these into account when directing their own actions. This is this whole like objective self idea and this whole idea of like social referencing. So Bowlby argued that infants develop an internal working model of attachment, a simple mental model of the caregiver, their relationship to that person, and how deserving they are themselves of nurturing care. The infant's internal working model of attachment with the caregiver influences the infant and later the child's responses to other people. This internal model of attachment has also played a pivotal role in the discovery of the links between attachment and things like emotional understanding, conscious development, and self-concept. So again, it's like this internal model is important because it's how they see themselves, how they see their world. It's in one of the most important things. In an extensive longitudinal study, early secure attachments were linked with positive emotional health, higher self-esteem, self-confidence, more social competence in interaction with peers, teachers, camp counselors, and then romantic partners in adolescence. Also, a meta-analysis, so a study of studies, found that secure attachment in infancy was linked to social competence with peers in adulthood. Another study showed that infants with attachment insecurity is linked with early childhood behavioral issues and social anxiety in adolescence. Again, it's not that it necessarily causes it, it's that it's linked with it. It seems to be that those two things are more often connected than you would just suspect randomly, as if there's a connection, right? As if there's a correlation, would be the word. Okay, social orientation. Let me get these points down. I think that's all. Oh no, almost missed that bottom point. Okay, good. Okay, in Ross Thompson's view, he's just a researcher doing research in 2016, he's talking about how these infants are social emotional beings who show a strong interest in the world. So I'm kind of reading a note, but if you wanted to just sort of focus on writing down what's on the screen, it's kind of the short form of what I'm saying. Infants are social emotional beings who show a strong interest in their social world and who are motivated to orient themselves towards it and to understand it. So they're social emotional beings that are in a social world with things that are meaningful to them, and their attempt to interact with that and their development are so interlinked it's hard to separate. As infants develop the ability to walk and crawl and run, they're able to explore and expand their social world. Enhanced locomotion, movement, and cognitive skills are influenced by social relationships, reminding us that these processes are intricately intertwined. That's a better way of saying it. Intricately intertwined. It'd be a good mixtape title. From early in their development, infants are captivated by their social world. Young infants are attuned to the sounds of human voices and stare at the face, especially in their caregiver's face. Within minutes of birth, infants look preferentially towards face-like patterns, and as they develop, they become adept at interpreting facial expressions. Face-to-face play begins to characterize caregiver-infant interaction. My daughter wants me to be seeing that she's playing with this doll, and she wants to be almost like sitting on the other side of me playing face-to-face. Play begins to characterize caregiver-infant interaction as the infant starts to age. Such play reflects the parent's motivation to also create a positive emotional state in their child. One last point I want to read here, and this is related to the bottom couple points. Infants also learn about the social world through context. So by when things happen, other than just the face-to-face play with caregivers. Even though infants as young as 6 months show an interest in each other, their interactions with peers increase considerably in the later half of the second year. Between 18 and 24 months, children have a marked, so a big increase in their imitative and reciprocal play. So imitative play means like you're doing something, I do something like it. Reciprocal play means like back and forth. For example, imitating nonverbal actions like jumping or running. One study involved presenting 1 and 2 year olds with a simple cooperative task that consists of pulling a lever to get an attractive toy. Any coordinated action of the 1-year-old appeared to be coincidental rather than cooperative, whereas the 2-year-olds were actively cooperating to reach a goal. So basically just your ability to because think about this. This is where I want to kind of step back and have you picture. that you and me playing in a game together actually is a pretty complex cognitive activity. It demands, especially if it's made up, right? Like if we're both kids running around the backyard with sticks pretending that we're fighting dragons, it's like we're pretending in our minds like we're in this real situation. We're almost sharing this imagined space. It's actually pretty high-end cognition, this kind of interactive play. Okay, so the same idea with this slide. I would have you just kind of get these key points. Then I want to just read you something. Yeah, so again, I'm just kind of the point form is on the screen. The joint attention, so both paying attention to the same thing and gaze following. So I want you to think about that. Joint attention means me and you are paying attention to the same thing. Part of that is I'm reading you a book maybe, and we're both looking at the book. And you're seeing that my eyes are going there, and you're looking at what I'm looking at. That's what gaze following would mean. Joint attention and gaze following help an infant understand that other people have their own attentions. Other people are looking at things, and sometimes we're looking at the same thing. The ability to link intention with emotional expression develops during the second year of life. Understanding others' intentions and goals improves significantly. That people do things for reasons. That improves significantly during the second year of life. Infants react Infants react differently to adults who display expected versus unusual responses to them. I'm just making sure this, okay, so I say on the screen, perceived others in intentional goal-directed behavior is socially cognitive accomplishment of around at the end of the first year. Yeah, so like by the end of the first year, the kids starting to realize that people are doing things on purpose. Linking intentions with emotional expression develops during the second year of life. By the first birthday, the child begins to direct the caregiver's attention to objects of their interest, like pointing at stuff and stuff like that. It's so interesting how the child's starting to realize, like, well, just think about like if I accidentally bump into the table and knock over her drink, or if I push it over with my hand, I did the same thing, but my intention was very different. One was an accident, one was like on purpose, probably to make them mad, right? So as the kid's getting older, they're starting to understand their social world better by understanding that people do things for reasons, that there's goal-directed behavior, right? So these are kind of like signs that the kid's getting smarter. You're starting to see that they're understanding intention, that people are doing things for a reason, that people have goals that they're working towards, right? And then this cooperation, or this ability to like have joint attention and be looking at the same thing. It's all actually a reflection of a developing cognitive system. The kid's getting smarter, more cognitively capable. This term, right? So this guy named Van Riesen and his team of researchers in 2011 coined this term a developmental cascade. It's like that's what a cascading river is. Like that picture's pretty awesome, but just how it's like one level, then the next level, then the next level, then the next level, then the next level, and it's like there's this developmental cascade. There's this connection between this wide range of things that are, some of these things we're talking about in this course are biology. Some of them are about the cognitive processing. Some of them are about the social and emotional processes. Some of them are about the world and the context they're in. And that and then all this is influenced by like culture and parenting. So it's like this idea of cascades, that there's connections across domains over time that influence the developmental pathways and outcomes. Developmental cascades can include connections between a wide range of biological, cognitive, social, emotional processes like attachment, and can also involve social contexts such as things like families, peers, schools, culture. Yeah, so just this idea of you developing into a complex adult is actually such a complicated question. It involves so many butterfly effect things, like so many things that affect other things. This developmental cascade, this complex connection across a wide range of processes. And some of those processes are biological, some are cognitive, and some are social emotional. And they exist within a context, within a world. You're a complex organism. Because then there's the whole like aspect of family, right? So I make this picture where there's like the marriage relationship, the parenting relationship, the kids' development. These are all in some complex interaction. There's like how, because like how me and my wife get along affects how my mood is, and that affects how I interact with my kids. It affects how my wife's mood is. It affects how she interacts with her kids. How we interact with our kids affects how their mood is, which affects how they behave, which affects how we then interact with them, 20 minutes later. So it's this continual interaction between parenting, the marital relationship, and the kid. That families have all these constellations of subsystems, and what that means is like within my family there's how we are as a four group, but then there's like my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my daughter Evie, my relationship with my daughter Charlotte, my relationship with my two daughters, kind of as a whole. Then there's like my wife's relationship with me, my wife's relationship with Evie, my wife's relationship with Charlotte, and then there's Evie's relationship with Charlotte, and Charlotte's relationship with me, and Charlotte's relationship with my mom, and Evie's relationship with my wife, I meant to say, and Evie's relationship with me. And that's all just within four people, that there's all these kind of subsystems of relationship. And just like within a family, there's these dynamics, all these dynamics, right? He calls, like, this is being referred to as a constellation of all the stars in the sky. This constellation of subsystems, this complex whole made up of these interrelated, interacting parts. Each family member participates in several subsystems which have these back and forth influences. Like my daughter Charlotte is influenced by how her older sister treats her, and that's influenced by how I treat the older sister, and that's influenced by how my wife treats me, or whatever, right? Like that, these things are all like influencing each other. And that, yeah, so I see here like a family can be thought of as a constellation of subsystems. These subsystems have a back and forth influence on each other. That parenting can cause this unbalance, and that it's about this disequilibrium as we try to adapt and maintain strong attachments, right? That it can be difficult because as a parent, I can relate to this. It's like, I want to be a good husband. I also want to be a good dad. I also want to be a good teacher. I also want to be, a good friend. And sometimes it's hard to, do all those things because, I don't know, because life can get pressuresome, right? But all this is to say, this child's developing in a complicated social context. In terms of, reciprocal socialization, back and forth socialization, that the baby influences the parents too. Some parents will report having a kid as a negative thing, some as a positive thing, but almost no parents will report that having kids didn't change their life at all, right? Like, I think if there's one thing everyone can agree on, it's that it changes your life. For some people, it can bring them close together, and for some it can bring them farther apart. It can definitely expose weaknesses in a relationship because all of a sudden you're adding there's a lot of benefits to parenting, but it's also a major obligation in terms of resources, in terms of time, in terms of effort, in terms of, let's even just say time and effort. And then, but in the same sense, it's like I wouldn't take it back for the world. Like Charlotte and Evie are my two favorite things in the world, basically. It's like to have this, I can't even picture myself as not their dad. That being a parent, affects your sense of self and can give you a more stable identity as an adult. And I think that's a part that we don't talk enough about. That being a father or being a mother's it's not just a lot of work. That's just such a surface way of looking at it. It's like maybe the most significant thing you'll do in your life. It's like with your child, you have the opportunity to create a quality of relationship that's unmatched. But the effect that you have on each other is back and forth. It's reciprocal. That I say that bidirectional socialization. That just means like not only are you teaching the kid of the social world, they're also pulling certain features out of you that are somewhat emergent. It's almost like people have qualities that are parental qualities within them that get pulled out from kids. It's kind of hard to explain. But it's like when Evie was born, all of a sudden I'm like almost crying watching like some like stupid commercial. All of a sudden I became like almost way more emotional, at least for a bit. It was like, I remember like almost laughing at myself about it. I went from like never being emotional. It's like there's a biochemical explanation to that. Okay. I like this picture, although for some reason my pants in this picture makes me look like I'm like 3 feet tall. I'm 5'10", but I don't know. I look short in that picture. This is me and my daughter, my oldest daughter, when she was young, at the butterfly conservatory or whatever. Yeah, and it's like I say this scaffolding, this parenting scaffolding, an important form of reciprocal socialization, or this back and forth influence, is this idea of scaffolding in which parents time interactions so that the infant experiences turn taking with the parents, right? Like my kid does something with my wife for a bit and then with me for a bit. This idea is that, yeah, and I know how this sounds, but this idea that like kids get different things from mom than they do from dad. That maternal interactions are usually more focused on child care related things. Again, these are broad, sweeping generalizations. Please don't think I mean all the time. I'm saying in general. Dads tend to engage in more things like rough and tumble play. Again, this is like really important that people know this, because kids that don't get much rough and tumble play tend to struggle with anxiety. That's a well-established finding. Because rough and tumble play is teaching you what's okay and what's not okay. Like we can wrestle, but you can't poke in the eye. It's actually teaching all kinds of rules of how to be socially, how to participate, how to eventually play sports and games and around play at recess. And it's so important. And that kids that don't get rough and tumble play when they're young tend to struggle with play behavior when they're at school too. And it tends to play out in relationships everywhere. There's a play aspect to things that if people don't develop that skill, it's difficult. Okay, so anyways, I got a bit ranty there, but just I wanted to make this point about how they're again, it's like, am I saying every mom interacts with their kids like this and every dad like this? No, of course not. But am I saying that if you took 100,000 moms and 100,000 dads and you looked at how they interact with their kids, would you notice some patterns? Yes. That's kind of my point. You've now made it to the end of chapter 4. Time to review our 8 key points to remember. I should have some kind of theme music for this part. Number 1. Emotion is feeling or effect that occurs when a person's in a state of interaction that's important to them. Infants display a number of emotions early in their development, such as crying, smiling, and showing fear. 2 fears that infants develop are stranger anxiety and a fear from separation from caregivers, sometimes called separation anxiety. As infants develop, it's important for them to increase their ability to regulate their emotions, right? So from when the baby's an infant, and it's a soother to when they're older and they're able to calm themselves down and soothe themselves, regulate their emotion. Number 2, temperament is an individual's behavioral style and characteristic ways of responding emotionally. I mentioned how Chess and Thomas classify infants as easy, difficult, or slow to warm. Kagan proposed that inhibition to the unfamiliar is an important temperament category. I don't know if I used Kagan's last name when I actually showed you that slide, but he's the person that had the inhibition to the unfamiliar concept. Rothbard and Bates emphasized that effortful control or self-regulation is an important temperament dimension. Goodness of fit can also be important for a child's adjustment. These last names aren't as important. It's just the people that did the research. Erickson's last name is important. He's a key person. Erickson argued that the infant's first year is this trust versus mistrust. I talked about that a bunch today. Independence becomes more of a central theme of the second year of life, which we'll get more into that stage in the next presentation. Right, we'll talk more about autonomy and initiative and industry. Okay, number 4, the strange situation. So that's when they had the mom leave the room and then come back, is a useful tool for examining attachment. Infants differ in how they react to their caregiver leaving and then re-entering the room. Number 5, infants show a strong interest in the social world and are motivated to understand it. Infants are more socially sophisticated and insightful at an earlier age than we previously thought. So kids are basically they understand more and in a deeper way earlier than we used to think they do. Number 6, attachment is a close emotional bond between two people. In infancy, contact, comfort, and trust. Contact, comfort meaning like the baby's crying, you pick it up and are snuggling with it, and that calms it down. Contact, comfort, and trust are important in the development of attachment. Securely attached babies use their caregiver, often the mother, as a secure base from which to explore the environment. 3 types of insecure attachment are avoidant, resistant, and disorganized. Caregivers of securely attached babies are more sensitive to the baby's signals. We talked about this idea as like contingent, and are more consistently available to meet their needs. 2 more points. The transition to parenthood requires considerable adaptation and adjustment on the part of parents. Ain't that the truth? Children socialize parents just as much as parents socialize children. Or not, I added the just as much. Probably not just as much. Parents definitely socialize their kids more than the other way around. But just like children socialize their parents, just like they get. Let me start that sentence over. Children socialize parents just as parents socialize children. Parents use a wide range of methods to manage and guide an infant's behavior. In general, mothers spend more time caregiving than fathers. Fathers tend to engage in more physical, playful interactions with infants than mothers. Again, that's not my point. That's a behavioral observation. The quality of child, and then here's the other thing, is like, we gotta just be honest, and obviously not all home scenarios are the same. Not all. Some families have more resources, more parents, more extended family, better schools. There's all kinds of, social economic reasons. And those are going to be some of the things we'll look at over the next few weeks. All right, that does it for today. You've been listening to the NU Digital Classroom, the coolest classroom this side of the Atlantic. We'll go with that again. I'll probably drop that immediately, but anyways, hope you enjoyed it decently, and hope you have an awesome Thanksgiving, and take care. Cheers.